Hello, friends. I am Heather Walpole, owner of UU Yarns, and I am here today to show you how to put together our celebration blanket. Over the last year, we have been knitting these beautiful blanket squares, and now is the time to assemble them all. So stay tuned. I show you how to block your squares, then we work on putting them together horizontally, and then we take the horizontal strips and we sew them together vertically. So stay tuned. I'm going to flip the camera and I'll show you how to do all those steps. So here we have all of our beautiful celebration blanket squares. We started with this first square and worked our way through all these different designs with different designers, getting to meet them, see their designs, and just a little bit about how they have come into my life with UU Yarns. So now that we have this whole thing finished, we have to take a little time to put it together. We're going to put it together in the order that we knit it. So we'll do 4 squares vertically, and we'll make 3 strips like that. And then we'll come back and we'll seam 2 long vertical seams to stitch the blanket together. So I'll show you all the steps to do that as we go along. Here we have a few of our celebration blanket squares, and as a quick way to kind of set the stitches before we sew all of these squares together is to do it with something called steam blocking. So I got my iron and I have a nice clean towel here. And what I'm going to do is kind of steam out the stitches so that the block sits more flat, and it's just a less labor intensive than a full wet blocking process. You can see this block has been steamed. It's nice and smooth. We wove in the ends a bit, but I haven't cut them yet. I figure I'll do that after the whole blanket is sewn together. So we'll start with this square. This is block 1. It has this cool flying geese stitch on it. And to steam block it, so our patterns say that the blocks are about 14 inches by 14 inches, give or take. Yours might be a little smaller, yours might be a little bit bigger, but you're going to try and get the blocks all about the same size for your knitting. So your finished blanket might end up being a bit larger or maybe a bit smaller, but that's just how gauge works, and it's not a critical piece, like it's not coming to fit your body or anything. So what I like to do is lay out my towel. I've got my iron on, it's pretty hot, it's set to steam. And now one thing to keep in mind, if you have knit this with UU Woolly Worsted, that is a washable all wool yarn, so it can handle the treatment from steam. If you have just knit this blanket in another yarn, such as something that contains acrylic, it may not be a great idea to do the steam blocking step. But if you got one of our kits and you used UU Woolly Worsted yarn, you are fine to do the steam blocking treatment. And what I like to do is get a tape measure and I'll run it out. Okay, so this square is hitting right at our 14 inches like we thought. And and the other direction. Okay, so we're falling about 13 inches in the vertical direction. And you can see there's some just, the stitch needs to be set a tiny bit. So what I'm going to do is take my iron, and it's got steam. I can see steam coming out. And I'm never going to touch it to my project. I'm just going to hover it over and let the steam sort of work its way down into the yarn. And what this is doing is just helping the yarn conform to the stitches you've asked it to. So this is going to make the yarn really help those knits and purls pop up and stay in their position. Because if you think about it, the yarn has been sitting in a skein, and it just needs to know how to behave in its new permanent position of this pretty design. So okay, I can feel the project is warm, and so we were good left to right, but we wanted a little bit of length in the horizontal. And you can see all the wrinkles that were sort of there from having knit it are kind of melting away. And so, oh, I'm still at 13. Now, if I need to, I could get some pins and pin it, but it's not that far off. So I'm going to give it a stretch and give it a measure. Okay, now it's sitting at 14, and now I'm just going to I'm going to hit it with a little bit more steam. One more pass. And now I'm just going to let this relax and dry and cool in this configuration. Take about 3-4 minutes, and you'll be able to feel like right now it's warm to the touch, but I'm just going to let it sit here and just air itself out, almost like if I had wet blocked it. I'm just going to let it rest. Here we are with the top left quadrant of our blanket. This was the first square we knit, called Flying High, and it is set in the top left corner of the blanket. So we are going to seam it to the second square that we knit, called Sprouting Leaves. I can't quite remember anyway. So the one with the leaf motif. So the plan is to sew the blanket squares on from these bind off edges to the cast on edges, and make a long column of the first 4 squares, then a long column of the next 4 squares, and then eventually we will take these and sew them together to make one big 12 square blanket. And I will show you how to do the horizontal seams, and then I'll come back and show you how to do the vertical. And we just need a couple supplies. I have some leftover yarn. It doesn't matter what color of your blanket you sew it together with. You can try and match to one of the squares if you want to, but the seams are actually kind of encapsulated and hidden, so you won't see this color. So you can use different colors throughout the blanket to seam it together, or whatever you have some leftover of. And then you need a Big Eye yarn needle, and a pair of scissors is always good to have on hand. So to get started, like I said, we are going to be sewing together this horizontal seam. I'll set these aside for a second. You can see I did this one, and I sewed this bind off edge to this block's cast on edge, and we have a nice tidy seam hanging out. I chose to do it with the saffron color here, and you really can't see the stitching at all when it comes to the berry side of the work here. Now, to do that seam, it's nice and easy. We're just going to match up stitch for stitch. I'll get this one out of the way a little bit. Another good reason to use a contrasting color of yarn to sew it together is that you'll be able to see the stitches you're working on. So if you have a tail, you can use that to seam in, but I woven my ends already on this, and so I'll just cut a little longer so I have more things to weave in. Now we go ahead and thread our needle. So here we have our 60 stitch squares. All of our squares had a 60 stitch cast on, and so that means that we're going to be able to pretty much match up one stitch from this square to one stitch from this square, and we'll just zigzag back and forth all the way across, and then it will just zip together. To get started, we want to work with the right sides of the projects facing. So you can see here we have our knits are showing, and you can see these are stockinette stitch on the background here. Same with this square. We have stockinette pockets. So I know this is the right side of the work as opposed to the wrong side. So we want to line up the squares right side to right side. We're going to work from right to left just across this row. Let me get this set of squares out of the way. We've threaded our darning needle, and now we're just going to come in right at the edge. Like I said, we're pretty much 1 to 1 across these stitches. So I'm just gonna put in my, we'll start here right at the edge, put in my yarn, thread my needle through, and then I'm going to come across to this side and grab, you can see that little heart right there. We're just going to go right below it so that that bit tucks away under our project. And I'll come in, oh, it's a little snug here. It's okay though. So I'll come in and pick up 2 bars from that side. And this is called fake grafting or mock grafting in garter stitch, and it just works back and forth, and it's just gonna line up 2 nice ridges of your project. So let me just get off the edge here a little bit, and then I'll be able to show you. So now you can see I have it loose, and what I'm going to be doing is picking up 1 stitch from that cast on edge. So I like to pick up the whole V. So my needle is underneath both of those. My needle is underneath both of those, and I just slide through with the yarn, and then I come back across and I go in the same hole that the previous stitch came out, and I pick up the V or 2 bars on this side of the project. And like I said at the beginning, we're just kind of making this nice and easy zigzag pattern. So the best thing I was taught is to go in where that yarn came out and pick up the next stitch. And don't be afraid to sort of, you know, move your work around and really, okay, my yarn's coming in there. I'll put my needle under there. I can see 2 bars. Now if I go a little further, okay, that's 3 bars on my needle. I want to come back a little. I go in where my last stitch was, move along 2 bars, and we just gradually work back and forth all the way across. And now, as we get some more distance on it, I'll show you. It looks like a lot right now, but if we hold this tail steady, we can easily just zip this seam right together. And bam, there it is, closed. Isn't that so cool? So this yarn can actually just, it's nice and loose, it's not looped around anything, so that yarn can just pull to set your stitches nice and smooth. And then, like I said, you can't even see it hiding in there. It's pretty great. So I went a little tight there. I'll loosen that back up so that I can see, as you know, where my yarn came out, my needle goes back in. I pick up 2 bars and let it set loose, come to the other side and 2 bars. And we're just going back and forth all the way along. And one good thing is, because they're the same size, all 60 stitches, your squares should go together nice and easy. All these seams, well, it's a little bit time consuming. That's okay. Just set it out on the table, make a cup of tea, sew a seam, go do something else, come back, sew another seam. So there we go. And now I can take these and zip them right up. And look at that. Look at that seam just going right along. And then as we get to the end of that row, we can just secure it off and weave it in on the back, which is another reason, I guess, why if you'd like to use a yarn that's one of these 2 colors, then you won't see the woven in end, or you could just weave it back in right into that seam and no one will be any the wiser. But do make sure that when you weave that seam in or weave that tail in, you get your tails in nicely, nice and securely, excuse me, so that they are like nice and tight, so that the blanket won't come undone. People can use it on the couch. It's meant to be loved and all of that. So just go right along here and I'll show you when it's done. So another thing I mentioned was setting it out and seaming on a table. And I do think that that is the best way or best place to do seams like this, because I think if you do it on your lap, like in your chair or on the sofa, you run the risk of maybe, I don't know, if it's jumbled up on your lap, maybe you accidentally combine, a stitch over here, or you know, maybe you're not really going one for one because you couldn't see it that well. So this is a project that this is a part of a project that I will always do flat on a table like this. Another thing is that because we're going into the same place on every row, we're picking up the same 2 stitches every time we go. It's really giving us a nice uniform edge, and that's another benefit of having it laid out on a table. And what I mean by that is you can see I have a really nice stitch for stitch meet up. You can see those lines, those rows, garter rows, clearly defined right there, and that's just a nice touch with a big project like this. My grandma always used to say, you know, the back of your work should look just as nice as the front of your work, which I think on some level is a lot of pressure to put on a handicraft. However, just to give you a glimpse of the level of handiwork my grandmother could do. So now you can see we're here at about our last few stitches, and our columns are still lining up. So we're just gonna zip across these last like 6 stitches. Pick up that last one there. Just knock that off. Now you'll see that the nice thing about this is that seam is actually still gives a little give to the blanket. All right, so now we have some pieces joined together vertically, and for the space I have here, I'm just going to show you how to join one little set of panels together rather than obviously the whole massive blanket. And we're going to be working in a similar fashion where we pick up a stitch from this side and pick up a coordinating stitch from the other side, and it is going to make a tidy little seam on the back. It'll look a little different than this, but same type of thing. But this seam will also actually add a little bit of rigidity to the blanket. And now you might see here that my blanket squares in this sample are not necessarily the same size, but that is because we had each designer knitting the square for the blanket, and so everybody's gauge is a little bit different, and that because of that we have varying sizes, but we work that all out for you in your blanket, and you will not have that issue because 1, you've knit the whole project yourself, and 2, if a square was too many rows when it came from the designer, we edited it and adjusted it so all of your blocks are 60 squares wide by 50 garter ridges tall, or 100 rows. So your squares should match up nice and tidy, row for row, and you should have no trouble. You might have to do a tiny bit of easing because things have moved, but I think you should have an easy time matching the rows. And like I said, this is another part of the project you're going to want to work on a table, especially as things get a little bigger. And you don't have to do it all in one sitting. You know, do a little today, do a little tomorrow. It's okay. It'll be there for you. So our supplies are just the same. Need a darning needle and a length of yarn. You might not want to use only one length of yarn for this entire 4-row strip, just because pulling yarn through a project to tighten it up could just make it like stretch in a strange way, or the friction could kind of weaken it over time. So, use a couple. It's okay. We have ends to weave in anyway. What's two more? I will start by seaming together these two squares so we have a nice contrast in color. Again, I can use any color of yarn that I have on hand. So now as we're working a seam in garter stitch to garter stitch like this, I like to match up. A garter stitch has sort of a smile bit and a frown bit is how I learned it. So I like to pick up under the smile and one row above. So as you can see, I'm kind of picking up under the smile, a row above, and coming out before the next smile. And I like to do the same thing on the opposite side. So I'll start, we can pick up just here at the edge. Oh, I want to come this way, sorry. And we'll pick up that edge stitch and get things started. We'll get started over here. It's okay if it's not perfect. You can always go back and try again. And then I like to pick up the same spot on this side. And now we'll be able to see there's a smile and here's a smile. There's a smile and there's a smile. I'm not right out on the edge, just sewing these edges together. I like to come in because that will help give this seam a bit of stability. Because like we said, these are going to be blankets that are used around our home, and we want them to hold together. So let me get a couple on here, and then I'll be able to really show you. And like I said, we're going to be able to just zip them right together like we did on our horizontal seams. So we have a smile here, we go under and you can feel one more bar above it. So I have 2 bars on my needle and I can pull through. Same over here, here's a smile, here's where my yarn was coming out. I go right back in that hole, pick up 2 bars, right there under the next smile, pick up 2 bars. Here's the smile and my next bar, and we just work our way along, zigzag, back and forth. Just take your time. If it doesn't look right, you can always just kind of come back a row, or pull it out and try again. I do that all the time. It's okay. So you can see this seam starting to form. And on the back, it's just a nice clean edge. We have about the same coming from each side of the each panel. And again, you can't see the contrasting thread even if I stretch it. So we just keep working. 2 from there and 2 from here. And the one good thing about working these stitches like this is it helps maintain the flexibility of the knitting itself. I think if you just went around and did a whip stitch, that wouldn't have any kind of give or stretch the way normal knitting does. So these just sort of help the knitting be itself. And you can see, look how fun that is. Just going right on up. And even though my panels didn't look the same, they're doing a great job of marrying up in size and shape, which is what will happen with your project. And especially with your project, because you are the only one that's made your squares. It hasn't been, each square hasn't been knit by 12 different people at 12 different times in 12 different places. So you can see these squares just coming together to form our celebration blanket. Look at that. Wow. So satisfying. And again, this, because we're just going right in where one stitch came out and going directly in the stitch above, we're really making a nice column, and it'll be a very nice clean edge. Every single row looks just the same, just like here. So you can really start to see how it's all going to come together. It's pretty cool, huh? So I'll sew these together and I'll show you. So I'm about here to where the seams join horizontally with our vertical, and you can see, remember how much smaller this green block had looked than the pink block, when in reality it isn't. So just row for row, we were at our 50 garter ridges, and you know, give or take, maybe there's one extra, but as I'm coming to this, and maybe you have one extra because you got distracted, or one less because you met, you know, whatever. Sometimes our knitting isn't perfect, and that's okay. But so I wanted to show you, I do have a little bit of extra green happening before the transition is. So if you've ever done any sewing, like garment sewing, you would know the term ease. So I am going to just ease a little bit of the extra green. So I'm kind of gonna have a little more green here than pink and ease those together so that this corner happens in a nice tidy way. And to do that, not really gonna change much, but so where I came out on the green side, instead of picking up the 2 bars, I'm going to pick up 3. And then on this side, I'm going to stay and pick up my 2 bars like I had. So I just added a smidge more of the green. And then over here, I'm going to come in where I went out, and I'm going to pick up 1, 2, and 3 bars again. And that will help my green and pink transition happen right at the corner to make a nice clean junction. So I went in there, now I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to go under and start up into the purple square. Where's the first purple smile? Right here. Ah. Oh, I've got that other thing. So we'll zip that together. And I came in here. Get this up to, boy, my needle's having some trouble this morning. Get that in there. Come over here, pick up 2 bars again, and just keep working our way along. Oh, I've got a loose stitch. See why I told you to maybe join new yarn? Got that a little tight, but there we go. It's all good. And see, now we can just work along on our next section of the seam. And we got all 4 all set in there. Okay, so now you can see how 4 sections of the blanket square go together. Look how neat it looks with this striped one joining up with a solid color one. Looks cool. We have 2 striped squares, so those will be fun transitions like that. And you can see the blanket's still nice and pliable in both directions, so it'll be nice and cozy to cuddle under. And the squares are really kind of making friends with each other. And then if you want to give it a final steam at the end to sort of get out any imperfections, you can, or just as you use it, the yarn will sort of set into its home. But as you can see, our seams are nice and tidy. So, as Grandma would have wanted. Do our seams, or does the wrong side look as good as the right side? You be the judge. But it doesn't have to. It's just something that's in the back of my head. I shouldn't put it in the back of your head. But you can see how the blanket is starting to come together, and you just go piece by piece and section by section, and soon you'll have a finished celebration blanket. Okay, so how was it? Are you sewing your blanket together? Did you learn things about how to attach your squares and get them all sewn together? Is your blanket coming together? You can leave me a comment down below and ask any questions you want, or if you head over to UU.com, you can always send us a message in the contact box. We are here to answer your questions. And yeah, if you knit the celebration blanket with me during my 10th anniversary year, thank you so much. I had a great time talking about all my designer friends and working on this blanket as we went. And yeah, I'm just thrilled to be on this yarn journey, and I hope you are happy with your blanket too. And yeah, thanks for coming along, and stay tuned for tons more projects.